Okay, let's look at the next thing that's actually on the list of news. Volkswagen accused of racist acceptance policy. Here we go. The race court's always on the news in South Africa. Let's see what they have to say. Let's see what they have to say here. Okay, so basically what's happening here is that the Afrikaner whites civil organization is trying to look out for the white people's best interests in an environment with policies that's trying to uplift the black communities and to a lesser extent the colored communities and to a lesser extent the Indian communities, but trying to uplift these communities, and as a result there's a lot of neglect on the white side. Obviously politically white people just don't have any say. For that matter, colored people and Indian people also don't really have any say. The black people are the masses, and so they basically have the say. And now, financially, the white people is a big middle class, massive proportion of the middle class. But most of them are just workers, Either they got a good education and they've got a good profession, maybe engineers or accountants, CAs, doctors, architects, building engineers, all kinds of engineers actually, computer scientists, that kind of stuff. Or otherwise they just got some kind of skill like a boiler maker or a plumber or electrician, things like that, and the rest of the people are just admin workers or office workers or service workers. There's a lot of that going on. But the fact is, most white people aren't really taught to be business people. Most of the businesses are run by big conglomerates that's owned by Anglo-Saxons from the good old days, or Anglo-Saxon Jews, Anglo-American is owned by Jews. I remember most of the big banks and insurance companies in South Africa being owned by Jews. Not being anti-Semitic here, I don't have a problem with Jewish people. But the point is, you have to differentiate about who is controlling what. A lot of middle class workers, working class white people are being targeted as they've got all the opportunities and they're so skillful. What's really happening is there's a very small group of white people that control everything in South Africa. They control, there's a couple of massive mining companies, massive banking companies, massive insurance companies, massive telecom companies, and massive retail companies and factory companies, and they own everything. Everybody works for them, The one place where white people did have a massive gain versus black people, especially in the old regime, was specifically in public service. And most of that was white people, so the white government was providing for the white people. And obviously the pendulum is swinging the other way, the black government is providing for the black people, which, comes and it goes that way. But the point is this: white people in South Africa in general are not business people. People in South Africa in general are not business people. They are used to working for big conglomerates, and that is a big deal. And now back to what's happening here with this Volkswagen thing. Basically, Volkswagen is obviously having a black empowerment policy, and that will definitely come from the pressure from the South African government. If you don't adhere to their black empowerment policies, then basically you get massively fined, or you'll have to close your factories even. That's just the way it is. And with such a big population in South Africa that's unemployed, it is a big deal for the ANC government to get black people work, and they are struggling massively. I mean, they are basically bloating the public sector to the nth degree to try to get black people work, because there isn't really that much work being generated in the private sector. Um, especially with the fact technology is increasing so much. Technology is basically one of two things: automation, which is killing, just about so many services out there, the brick and mortar services, call centers or, salespeople or whatever. And the other thing is communication, So there again, tons and tons of people getting the job as well. So there's a lot of jobs being cut in the private sector so that people can stay competitive against international companies, like, let's say, other mining companies in places like the US, Canada and Australia. I mean, I've actually heard that Anglo American in Australia, they have a coal mine and there's no people underground there. It's basically just robots being remotely controlled doing all the work. You can't do that in South Africa. You'll basically be cutting off like a massive workforce, chucking more and more people into poverty. Just can't do that. So now the problem is there's a lot of white people that's working class, that don't really have business skills or business savvy, or is brought up to be business savvy. And what do you do with all of them? Because if the white middle class is already in the best jobs, you can't go and give them all the other jobs. It's all easy to say, jobs should go to the best person. But in the political spectrum, that's just not the way life goes, right? So now AfriForum is basically complaining that Volkswagen has racist policies, which is true. They have racist policies, but then the old regime had racist policies. But then, are you going to use one racist policy to supersede another racist policy that you've removed? I mean, that's basically calling the kettle black. At some point it has to stop, and if you want the country to go forward, you have to take your best educated people and get them into the workforce, or otherwise teach them to run businesses so that businesses can expand. At least get international businesses in and get these people to run the companies for them. There's no point in marginalizing them and not giving them opportunity, because if you can't get businesses expanding in South Africa, you're doing nothing, and you're just causing long run future trouble. So that's really what this is about. This is quite interesting, actually. I mean, I laugh about it a bit. It's a bit sad, but it's basically going around in circles. It's always the same. It might come to air at some point, but that will be something that people really shouldn't wish for. Groups merely based on the color of their skin. It's always the same. It's quite funny talking about black empowerment. I had a guy that studied with me, a friend, and he was studying IT, become a programmer. And when he finished his degree, he wanted to become a SAP consultant. Now, way back then, SAP was the big thing. Man, they were racking it in, making like more than $1,000 a day consulting, maybe even more. And so he wanted to be a SAP consultant, and he had a surname, and he applied for a role. He kept on struggling to get interviews. He couldn't get interviews, and then he got the interview. And as soon as he walked in, the guy just started laughing. And he said, "What's the problem?" The guy said, "I'm really sorry to waste your time, but I can't give you a job." He's like, "Why?" He said, "Because I thought you were colored. I didn't know you were white." So then the guy decided to study bioinformatics. I'm pretty sure he got a job in that, or he left the country afterwards. But that's sort of the way it's going. You're talking about highly skilled people leaving because of that. It's a big deal. If you can't get those guys good jobs and you can't build businesses to support them, then it's putting a lot of pressure on the country, because the world is becoming more technologically savvy and productive, and that means South Africa just has to keep up, right? Um, I don't think anything will happen from this with Volkswagen. I mean, everybody in the world knows for the last 25 years what the policies has been. The problem now is the white youth of South Africa is paying for the previous generation's sins. That is a bit rough, but that's the way it is at the moment. A lot of the people that could have left already, and a lot of the doors that was opened for them have been closed. For instance, like getting into the UK or the US or Australia is becoming tougher and tougher. I remember when I finished my degree, there were actually people the next day after their last exam. They didn't even wait for the ceremony or anything, or waiting to see if they have to do a rewrite of an exam. They just had an airplane ticket already booked to places like Ireland or England or Canada. They just left, never looked back. On that note, actually, it's quite interesting that medical doctors from South Africa, back then, medical doctors in South Africa, they were really decent, right up there with the best in the world. We still have good doctors, but I think the standards dropped a fair bit. I've talked to some old doctors. They said they wouldn't go to young doctors for help. They say they're useless. Either way, that's not really a rant, that is just a comment. Take it with a pinch of salt, it's up to you. But any case, so the funny thing was that that there was actually such a complaint in England about doctors in South Africa and medical staff in South Africa leaving to come and work in England, that a skills visa, which anybody with a fairly decent qualification in South Africa could get to come over to the UK and work here, and that way actually come and live here for the rest of your life. They basically were banned from that visa, medical doctors. And the fact is, medical doctors in South Africa was the cream of the crop of the children. The smartest of the smart, the most hardworking of the most hardworking, the most talented of the most talented. That's the only people that became doctors in South Africa. Everybody else did something else. And they couldn't actually come in with a visa that someone with a mediocre educational degree, I call it mediocre, but for something like engineering or programming or accounting, anybody can really do that if they want. It's not that stringent to get your foot in the door or get a degree. Anybody that's willing to work hard enough can get that, but not anybody can get into medical school. You have to be like in the top 2% of your school. You just have to have like straight A's, and then you still have to do your interviews and have to select you, and and then it's 2 years of hard competing to stick in the program. So on that rant as well, actually, it's quite funny that about 20% of Canada's doctors is South African. A lot of them left back in the day. You can just imagine the kind of voids in South Africa in the services sector due to this kind of stuff. Either way, an interesting little article this. But these kind of organizations for the minority groups in South Africa is always complaining, but they're always civil. They don't cause any trouble, and they don't really rock the boat, so nothing really happens from it. The South African government laugh it off, and the international societies just say, you know what, you get what you deserve, you're all bad, white, black demons, blah 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 blah, just go fetch, you should suffer for your past sins. Either way, it's a bit like that. We'll see, maybe in the future things will change, but by that time South Africa will have a lot of hurt, I guess. Another little interesting chat. I'll cut this one off as well.